Good morning. I'd like to call to order the Finance and Administration Committee meeting for April 25th, 2024. May I have a roll call, please?
Yes, good morning. Director Ranjiv Kush
Here.
and Chair Jed Smith.
Here.
Currently not present are Directors Monty Schmidt and Director Matt Sampson's out, and I believe I see Director Larry Russell joining us.
I'm here.
Okay, great. Well, that makes it a quorum, and it also makes it a special meeting of the Board of Directors. And so Larry's here. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
So moved.
And a second from Larry?
Second.
Okay, great. Any public comment on the adoption of the agenda?
There are none.
Great. And a roll call for the motion, please.
Yes, Director Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and Chair Smith.
Aye.
Thank you.
Great. And any public comments on non-agenda matters?
Yes, I have Mr. Ed Jameson. Mr. Jameson, I've unmuted you, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks. Projects for critical new water supply will need to be funded by our limited bonding capacity. The March 5th finance meeting indicated the district's bonding policy leaves $271 million available for capital projects, but we don't know that the market will actually take another $271 million of bond issuances. Our drought supply inadequacy will likely cost $300 to $400 million to resolve, perhaps even more. Lesser projects, including those costing around $20 million, need to be funded by operating revenues, not bond issuances. With our large overhang of capital projects, I believe we need outside bond counsel to give us an informed estimate of our remaining bonding capacity so that we can develop a thoughtful strategy for funding our capital spending needs. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Great. All right, so we'll move on to the regular items on our agenda, and item 4A, the minutes from the Finance and Administration Committee meeting from March 28th. May I have a motion to approve the minutes, please?
So moved.
Second. Great. Any public comments on the minutes?
There are none.
Roll call, please.
Yes, Director Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice Chair Schmidt,
Aye.
and Chair Smith.
Aye. All right, now move to item 4B, and that'll be led on by Vicki, our Human Resources update.
Thanks, Terry. Thank you very much. I'm here to provide just some information. Today, I'll talk about recruitment updates, specifically our website and application portal, recruitment status, the occupancy of positions in our organization, commuter benefits to support our employees, and an update on 360 reviews. If I can get this thing to work. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. That's the overview that I just provided you. So I'll start with our employment page, and thank you for the work of our communications department. We have an updated employment page. With that employment page, we have an opportunity to see employees and showcase employees at work. So you have employees represented in different areas of the organization, such as customer service, fisheries, maintenance, engineering. So it gives the job seeker a little insight into, it starts giving the job seeker some insight into what we do here at the district. A nice feature now is that we have the view current job openings button. Prior to, in our old website, that button or that link was embedded into a paragraph, and it was the same font size and was very difficult to find. So this makes the clickability portion of the navigation easier, which is good when on any website, you don't want people to click too many times to get where they want to go because they start losing interest. So this is a good improvement for us. After they click the view current opportunities, they're led right to our current job posting portal, and that is managed by our recruitment team. And they will see a list of our career opportunities in that portal. And by hovering over the job that they're interested in, they will receive a flyout, and this is the flyout portion of the page. And with that, they'll get information specifically about the district, the job, the benefits that we offer, and any other relevant information. And so our recruiting team is always looking at ways to update the page, keep it engaging, and make it keep it easy to navigate. So, and we have updated our recruitment flyer. It's nice and bright and more inviting. And this is the first page of the recruitment flyer. And then I'll scroll to show you the other pages of the recruitment flyer. It's just a better look. Or it's our new job brochure, rather. And then our LinkedIn presence, we updated our LinkedIn postings to include a standardized banner and also more eye-catching pictures with graphics that take up more space on the news feeds that would, make us stand out when job seekers are scrolling for opportunities. We're more visible on our LinkedIn page.
I think it'd be great if other directors, staff, leadership, anyone can help support our LinkedIn postings. I think I often find I'm the only one who gives it a big old thumbs up, but let's leverage each other's networks and get as many possible recruits here as we can. And I don't know if that's communication with the staff. I know a lot of private companies I'm involved with give incentives to staff if they refer someone, or we probably can't do that, but some ways that we can help encourage people to bring in terrific recruits so we can get the best people.
Thank you. Thank you for your support on the platform and for sharing our opportunities.
But it looks great and I appreciate the
Yes,
postings.
if I could just comment on that too a little bit more.
Yeah.
We just kind of reimagined our LinkedIn and recharged it and are getting that revved up. And certainly that's the next step. We're trying to get some more engaging content on there, starting to kind of post behind the scenes, look at our employees, what they're doing in the day to day. And certainly that's kind of next step. Thank you.
I was introduced to something called Handshake on Friday.
Yes, we use Handshake.
Oh, we do already. Okay, great.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Okay, so I'll move on to our current recruitments. These are the recruitments that are currently underway. They're in different stages of the recruitment process. Some are just posted, some we're testing candidates, some we're interviewing candidates. But that's what we have currently, right? What we're working on right now. And then we have 4 conditional offers for regular positions. And then we also just made 2 more offers for seasonal positions. So we have 6 conditional offers on the table right now. And just a look back for the 12 months, just to share that we have had 5 employees promoted through a competitive process. And the competitive process means that they are either competing internally, it's a posted internal only position, or they're competing with outside candidates. So we had 5 employees promote through that process this year so far. And we have 10 new employees. And again, like I mentioned, we have the 6 conditional offers so on the table. So that's 21 movements. So I want to go back and do a look back, a 12-month look back, just to show some movement. We filled 72 vacancies. We have 38 regular positions that were filled and 15 seasonal positions filled. And 19 of those 72 vacancies were promotions via the competitive process. And then we had 10 promotions that were non-competitive. So that number looks pretty high. So I want to kind of dive into that, okay? Okay, so what drives those vacancies? One is the promotion process. So if we have let's say a superintendent retires, then if we recruit for the position and we offer it to an internal person, that person moves up, and then that creates a supervisor position perhaps. And then that supervisor position creates a utility crew leader position. So those type of things add to it. But in addition to that, we also had a lot of retirements in the past 2 years. So, and that's not something specific to Marin Waters. It's something that a lot of employers are facing as baby boomers have reached retirement eligible age and are moving out of the workforce. And then after COVID, we had the great resignation or great reconsideration. So we had some employees that moved out of, we had an employee move out of state, left employee leave to take care of family. Some people got promotional opportunities. It was a very competitive market, got promotional opportunities with other employers, and some people just wanted to work closer to home. So we had some movement in that area. So, and just to talk about a little bit about the retirement eligible, just to show that movement, we currently have 24% of our employees that are eligible for retirement, but 2 years ago we had 32%. So again, we were bracing for this. We knew it was going to happen. All employers were ready for this type of movement. So that's where we are with respect to retirement. So currently we have 24% of our employees are retirement eligible. And then this is just a snapshot of our occupancy by department. The blue indicates positions that are filled. So just, and that's going to be fluid as people move around and move from department to department and retire. So. And then our employee residency, just a data point to share with you. I mean, it's a significant point that 76% of our employees live outside of the service area. And the number of employees that live in the service area hasn't changed much. But what has changed is we have more employees living in Sonoma County. Prior to 2019, that movement in 2024. So to support our employees, we have a commuter benefit program. So I'm segueing into that. According to 511.org, nearly a quarter of employees say that they have left a job because of a commute. And 511.org is a partnership between the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. So according to their research. That is according to their research. But we, again, want to support employees who are commuting. We provide a subsidy for employees. We have 40 employees that currently participate in the program. And we also offer a bike reimbursement program for related expenses for biking to work. We also offer telework, and then 511.org recognizes telework as a form of commuter benefit. And then moving to another status update outside of recruitment.
Any comments on
Yeah,
the
thank
recruiting
you.
efforts so far? Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure, yeah. So I just know that one thing that we've tracked over time is just the number of vacancies that we've had in somewhat coming out of 2021, 22. We had like 25 vacancies. It was a little bit of a cost savings measure. I know I think I saw that we have like 13 vacancies now, or can you tell us where we're at in closing the gap on the vacancies that we held,
Yeah.
that we kind of held in place as a cost savings, and out of concern for the impact that was having on the staff that was kind of filling in for, while those spots were open?
Well, we have filled, as you saw, a significant number of vacancies. We have a 10% vacancy rate about. We have 13 recruitments underway. Like I said, we have 16 people coming on board, and we're continuing to move those vacancies to the field category. Some are being held. There are two, like, for example, we have some that are holding right now, which are heavy equipment operators, because the department is training employees because they want to give them that opportunity to advance to that position. So we're holding those as those employees go through the training so that they can compete for those positions.
Okay, great.
So
Thank you.
It'd be great, Vicky, to see the evolution over time of open positions, retirements, reasons for leaving, new hires coming in. Just a snapshot is just a snapshot. So, but it seems that 54 new people in an organization like this, 25% of our organization or so, are recruited and started work in the last year. That sounds really high, maybe unusual. I don't know. But any comments about how over time retirements have shifted, vacancies have shifted, et cetera, would give us a sense of what you're dealing with.
right. And then just for clarification, is 30, I think it was 38 or 33. Those other ones are seasonal employees, as I pointed
Seasonal,
out.
okay.
Yeah, so
Got it.
that, yeah.
Okay.
So, and then to keep in mind, we had 35 retirements and we had 33 new employees.
Right. And is
So
that unusual? Is that high? Is that
the
low?
retirements are high because that's what was always anticipated
Right.
with the baby boomers being able to retire.
And so is that 24% more of a target now that's appropriate with the number of people eligible for retirement? Whereas before, I think it was 30.
Yeah, we had 32%.
32, yeah.
Now we have 24. So if
Right.
you look at the number of new hires versus number of retirements, it kind of matches up.
Right. So 24% is a target, is usual? Is it high, low?
It's lower than what it was, and it's not unusual for public agencies or even private sector agencies because of the
But 32 is high.
32 was high, but 32 is normal.
Okay.
Yes, it's high for everyone.
Yep.
Everyone is
Right,
dealing
right.
with the same thing.
Okay. Thanks.
Mhm. Oh, okay. Oh, no, any other questions on that one? Okay. And then just for status of the 360 reviews, the SLT reviews were completed. And after we completed the SLT 360 reviews, we provided training to employees on giving and receiving 360 feedback because we thought that would be a valuable intermediate step to make this a more meaningful process. So we did provide that training, and then the mid-manager review surveys have been completed, and we're considering the timing and approach for the next, for the supervisor group.
Vicky, thank you so much for this. This has been something I know I've brought up for some time, and it's great to see the 360 review process coming to the organization, seeing it trickle down further deeper into our organization. I think I'm a big believer that this is what leads to really great partnerships between different levels of our staff, and I'm glad to see that we're doing training about how to do it successfully, because sometimes, it's complicated how to give, feedback in a constructive way. I think that's a challenge.
Right, and how to receive it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what it means and what it doesn't mean. It can get very complicated. So thank you I think this builds a lot toward the culture that we want to be fostering. Do we have a sense of just broad numbers of, I don't know, I know how many people we have in the organization. I don't know how many, are going into these different levels. Can you give just approximate numbers of the folks that'll have gone through in February, and then mid-managers, what, just as a percentage kind of our
For
folks?
for the SLT, we have, I think, 6 people on SLT. And then we have about 20 mid-managers.
Okay.
Okay. And then that concludes my report information. Again, we refreshed our page, we've backfilled positions, and we're offering commuter benefits, and I gave a status update on our 360 reviews.
Comments?
Just thanks, Vicky. That's a great update. I didn't appreciate the degrees, the amount of recruitment that's underway and the number of positions that have been filled recently. It's I think a good illustration of how much activity is going on in the HR department. So kudos for managing all of that. And thanks again for a really nice summary.
Thank you. Thanks for your attention.
It would be great to have more detailed review of churn, why people are leaving over time, how that's shifted in the next update for me. Yeah.
Understood.
And the Gallup poll results, I know that's not on our agenda. Is that just something for our information, or are we going to discuss it in a board meeting at some point?
Yeah, we're definitely going to discuss it at some point. As you know, you saw in the email, we're putting together a committee that's going to develop kind of the plan and own it. And yeah, then we'll bring it, roll out, discuss it with the board and roll it out to staff in the coming, hopefully kind of a 6-week time frame, something like that.
Great. Okay, any public comments on the human resources update?
There are none.
Great. Well, this was just an information item only, and now we'll move on to 4C and our head of finance, Brett, for the monthly financial update.
All right, good morning, directors. My name is Brett Uppendahl. I'm finance director. This item today before us is the monthly financial update, routine item, informational only. There hasn't been a lot of difference this month. I'll kind of preface this report. There hasn't been a lot of difference this month from prior months. And so in the interest of time and the next items, I'll probably just go through this pretty quickly here. Happy to stop and answer any questions if we need to. We are now through 75% of the fiscal year for financial reporting as of the end of March. And so you see the numbers here trending, again, very similar to how they have been the last 3 or 4 months in terms of the slow months in the wintertime. Total operating revenue at 70% of the budget, which obviously is below the 75% linear trend. We expect to catch up to that in the summertime as water sales will increase kind of disproportionately with higher use in the summer. We have, as a reminder, compared to the last few months, we've added prior year information up there. So you can see that we're both better on track towards the budget and better overall in terms of operating revenue. And I think that's kind of the bottom line good sign for the organization. Capital revenue is a little bit more steady in the sense that it's a fixed fee source, CMF. And so that is tracking at 74%, which is obviously much closer to the 75% linear trend. And we expect that to hold true for the rest of the year as well. Overall, bottom line there, we're just above 70% of overall revenues to the budget. Again, that's a little behind where we'd expect to be right now. But as I'll explain in a few minutes, I think we're balancing that out with reduced expenses. And so it's not a cause of concern at this moment. When we go into water sales revenue, which is the biggest driver, obviously, of our financial condition, one thing I've noted, and you'll see in the next couple of slides, is that our actual volumetric water sales is what's really dragging everything down. March there being only 72% of what we expected to get in March. So it was a very slow March. I think a reminder here, you can see it on the very, very bottom of the deck, but this is a 2-month lag. And so when I'm talking about March, I'm actually talking about sales that happened in January and February for the most part. And so I think we all remember the winter being pretty steady rains and pretty steady cool weather. I think that was also described in the IJ today in terms of a healthy winter for the environment, healthy winter for the drought. It kept people from turning their water on, which is a good thing in many ways, not great for financials. So we'll see how that turns out over the summer. Service charges being fixed or much more in line with what we'd expect, as is capital maintenance fees. So again, continuing a trend we've seen all year. We just had a kind of a lower dip there in March than we've seen in the past few months. This is water consumption. And again, this has been pretty consistent over the last 4, 5, 6 months in the sense of, matching with our trends and our expectations and how we, budgeted or how we forecasted the year. This kind of slow and steady return back to a normal, but still well below normal. So we had a 4% increase. This is cumulative year to date at this point. So we're looking at all water sales from July to March. And we're talking about consumption here. So not dollars, just total acre feet. We're 4% better than last year. So we're continuing to trend upwards as expected, still 9% below our longer term average, again, as expected. If you take a little bit deeper dive into the details there, this last March was actually our lowest March in the last 12 years in terms of overall 1 month consumption. Lower than any month in the drought and lower than any month earlier in the decade. So again, I haven't seen a lowest in a while, but we had to hit a low, is what it is for March. I would also note this is our slower month for billing. We have less actual customer reads in this month. So again, I'm not concerned yet. I'll keep a closer look as we get closer to the summer to make sure we're getting close to the trends by the end of the year. But at this point, we're kind of slow and steady and relatively predictable. Expenses, again, this is kind of what's saving us. We do have savings here in the sense that we have not spent.
Sorry, Brett, can I just, before
Sure.
going, just a couple of points on revenues. So sales are holding at about 4% over what we saw last year, although it's still below the projections that we had made for the budget.
Yeah,
Slightly,
yes.
About 4%. And I think if we look at our revenues, they're about 26% over the same point last year.
Yes.
Given the sales increase of 4% and what we had projected with the new rate structure, I know the full year of data is not in, and that's when we get the best sense of how well the projections or the modeling for the rate structure will hold with reality. But do you feel like what my sense is this is sort of online with what we were projecting with the rate structure. This is currently about 26% above last year in revenues. Do you agree with that?
Or you take out the 4%, then the rate impact is up about 22%.
That's right. So I feel like we're again, it's early, right? So to start to make any conclusions, but I feel like things are trending in the direction that the modeling for the rate structure had anticipated.
I would generally agree. I mean, I think you've said all the points that I would have made in a response, in the sense that, we're still early. I think, at this point, we're looking at kind of the big indicators, we're 1 year through the 4-year, rate cycle. The first year is probably, the closest to what you'd expect, right? If you have a crystal ball, the first year is probably more in line with where you expect to be than, out years will be. So, I don't want to kind of, take too much of it yet. I want to see a summertime and I want to see how the tiers work. Cause you may recall, we not only did we change the tier pricing, but some of the cutoffs. And so I think in the summertime, that'll be important to look at because it's not just total acre feet or total CCFs on every bill. It is kind of, where those fall, in the tiers. And so that'll be more interesting to see in the summertime when we get that kind of wider spread, wider dispersion of use. And so I really look forward to kind of seeing a full year of data and then coming back to the board, sometime in the early fall and kind of being able to answer your question more thoroughly.
Yeah, but good signs from my
Yeah,
perspective.
definitely. Yeah.
I might just shift one word. I think when you said we're 4% better, I think we have 4% more revenues, but obviously consumption helps everybody. If we have less, we have more water supply for a longer period of time. People are spending less money. It's better for the customers. So
Yeah.
Higher revenues, but we're showing a pretty good conservation trend over time.
Fully agree. Yes. Thank you. Okay, to expenses, and I've mentioned this the last few months. Again, we are tracking below expenses, which is what's keeping the bottom line in order, being a little bit lower than expected in revenues. We just had Vicky finish her presentation on vacancies, and that's really what's driving the personnel services being a little below the kind of 75% expected trend. We also will have a little more overtime and a little more seasonals, as Vicky mentioned, as we kind of ramp up in the summer for projects and as we have more longer days and longer coverage. So we do expect kind of a more backloaded charge on personnel services when we get there. But for now, we're in a good range financially speaking. I know we'd like to fill the positions and we'd like to be closer to budget over time, but we're getting there. It doesn't happen overnight. Maintenance operations, that's that kind of stands out there as still being in the 50s in terms of percent to date. A big part of that is that we have contracts out there that just haven't billed us yet. And one of the bigger contracts is our paving costs. And I think we'll have a lot of that over the summer. And as we get these final bills from some of the main breaks we've had recently. So we'll get the paving that come to our operating budget. We'll get the paving costs later in the year, and that'll jump up pretty quickly, I believe. The rest of it is as anticipated. Financing costs are, kind of pretty slow and steady. So those are easy. And we actually accrue those each month to kind of smooth it out because we do pay those in 2 chunks essentially in our debt service. So we accrue those, and that's why it's exactly 75%. And then capital allocation, that's kind of our staffing charges of the capital program. And that kind of reflects some of the ramp up that's about to happen. We haven't charged all our hours there quite yet, but it does track closer to our overall, operating personnel services. So again, in here, I think, we're looking good. We're still in the first year of a 2-year budget, and capital expenses down there at the bottom will be ramping up significantly over the summer. And I think our director of engineering will be providing a CIP update in an upcoming board meeting as well to give more information there on when to expect some of the bigger projects to come through. But all in all, a good sign financially speaking. Revenues are outpacing expenses. Expenses are, still moving forward as we want them to get the work done. But we haven't had any major surprises or anything that's of concern at this point. So again, a generally positive sign in terms of financials. So in summary here,
Sorry,
sure,
yeah, Brett, just a couple of quick questions on expenses. From the detailed reports, you'd also note there, one of the categories is customer reimbursement project, which is over budget. And I just, could you tell us what that includes?
So customer reimbursement projects are typically, and so that's what you're seeing there is the revenue actually, I believe, on the customer reimbursement projects.
Okay.
And so what that is, when we have our capital plans that we anticipate, doing our work, but when other cities and or other, private entities need to get work done, they will reimburse us for work we do to help them either connect to our system, modify connections to the system, repair pipes on their side. So it's really kind of unanticipated jobs that we're being reimbursed by the outside agencies for work that our staff is doing related to the water system, if that's a good enough explanation.
Got it. Thanks.
Mhm.
You noted that capital expenditures are below, are low at this point, and some of the specific items, for example, pipeline replacements are quite quite a significantly below what we might have we might be expecting. So I understand that there will be an update on capital projects coming up, but just wanted to flag that as maybe something that will be helpful to get more detail on.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have scheduled a capital CIP update for the board. As you may recall, the last one that Alex gave, he did reflect on some supply chain issues that got resolved. So we do have a bit of a pipeline of projects and design that we're moving into construction, and that's right. Construction is a big dollar. So that's when we'll be pulling it down in the next couple of months.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder, Ben. I remember the supply chain issue.
Okay. So a summary slide here on the monthly financial report is that, again, revenues are lower than expected, 7.5% exactly below our expectation. I did not mention it earlier in the slide. It's in the staff report. I've mentioned it kind of in passing the last 2 or 3 meetings, but we did finally receive our one-time COVID relief grant funds this month. And so we applied for those back in November. You may recall that this is state kind of pass through from the federal COVID relief funds. And what they do is they say any customers in a specific time period that had past due accounts, the state will kind of, wipe their slate clean. And so we were able to apply for, on behalf of our customers, about 1.5 million in state revenues to wipe clean any past due accounts. And that benefited about 3,000 of our customers. And so it was definitely win-win for the district and for our customer base. And so that is one time. And so again, that helps offset some of the, less than targeted revenues, and that goes straight to our bottom line. And in many of those cases, we would have not seen that money. And so all good all around, but it is one time in nature. So we don't expect to see that again in the future.
Brett, will I be getting emails thanking us for that in the same way that I get those emails with other concerns?
I kind of doubt it, but nonetheless, we partnered with Adrienne and her team to make sure everyone knew they were getting the credit. They got special bill mailers, and so they should be well aware that if they were having trouble paying their bills, that they no longer have to. So all good news.
It's really fantastic. I mean, you can only imagine for people who are financially stressed to the point where they're looking at inability to pay for their water bill, to be relieved of that. I mean, I think it's really fantastic. So thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we do have to be careful, and I know Brett's thinking about it. There's some customers that got 2 reliefs that may feel like, boy, maybe there's another one coming. We know there's not. So now we have to get back into our traditional mode of following up and uh,
Expenses, both operating capital below budget. We expect those to increase towards the back half of this year. Total water consumption slightly below the budgeted amount. Again, 4% above last year, but still 9% below historical averages. And that concludes my report for today. Happy to take more questions.
Great. Any comments, Larry? Ranjiv?
Thank you, Brett.
Brett, I'm super appreciative of your clear presentation looking at actuals versus last year, year to date, and budget. I think it's the clearest presentation yet. So I think now we have a format that we can work with going forward. So thank you very much for listening and responding. Any public comments on the financial update?
There are none.
Great. So this is just for information only, and we'll move on to item 4D, which is our water supply financial planning review.
This is me again. I'll bring it up here. Okay. So this is a special report, informational only. No action will be requested of the board. What this really is, and there'll be a lot of numbers and a lot of slides here, so I'm going to take more time on this one than the last one, obviously. But what I'm trying to do here, and what I think would be helpful for the board, is as you're having discussions with Paul and his team and the engineering consultants over long-term water supply projects, what I wanted to do is just try my best to kind of summarize where we're at now with our financial plan. And kind of remind the board and the public of kind of where our policy limits are, kind of trying to set those bookends, not necessarily saying what we should do, but just, what we can do and what's, out there and what the general ratios are and kind of back of the napkin kind of planning type things. And so this will go through some big numbers, some small numbers, and kind of everything in between on purpose. I was trying to kind of put it out there so that we can have a discussion and so you can have this as reference material going forward. Obviously, we're talking about things pretty far in the future. So, a lot of this is wide range and kind of high level and not specific. And I'll try, not to have too many more disclaimers as we go through here. But in the back of my mind, that's all that's flying through my head is disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. Objects, anything out there more than a year or two are really hard to predict. But, that's what we're here for. So we'll start the discussion on that. Overall, our financial plan that we have now in the budget and in our rate structure supports increased investments in our water supply roadmap and also in district-wide capital improvements. And so in my mind, those two are the biggest investments we're making in the rate structure and the budget going forward. And the two of them kind of work hand in hand in many areas in the sense that they're dealing with big dollar issues. When we talk about the water supply roadmap, we're talking about a combination of things, and that's why it's the roadmap. It's not just one thing there, but we're talking about operational improvements. We're talking about the conservation element. We're also talking about capital investments in water supply enhancements. And that includes both early action items, which I'll remind the board and the public what we mean by that, as well as these longer term investments that we're looking into. And when we talk about capital improvements district-wide, the way I see it is three different categories. We have what's called our baseline projects. We've been doing those, forever. We cash fund those. That's why we have the CMF, day-to-day repairs, kind of long-term CIP, just to kind of keep things running and to make targeted investments where we can. Deferred maintenance, it was a new kind of bucket we put into the budget this year, and that was intended to really kind of start attacking this backlog of all of our infrastructure. You'll remember what we called the Nessie curves, those kind of big, scary, growing, unfunded, maintenance needs going out 10, 20, 30, 50 years. And it's just the result of having a very old system with many, pipes, pumps, and tanks that are, 50 plus years, 75 plus years that will need to be replaced, sometime in the next 25 to 30 years. So right now we're cash funding our deferred maintenance, meaning we're raising more and more money off of rate revenue each year to be able to kind of attack that at a more aggressive pace. And then we have what's called large projects, and those might also be considered deferred maintenance, but they're basically projects that are central to our system that are high dollar amount, more than just you can attack in 1 year of a CIP. The capital team came, I believe, about a month ago and talked about our top 4 priorities there, and we had a discussion over where we might want to spend our efforts. I have cash or debt funded there because I think we still have the option open to continue cash funding those and just plugging money away and taking kind of the slower pace there. Or we've talked about we can go out for debt service in a couple years to really knock off one or two of them, quickly if we decide to do that. So, we haven't made the decision on whether we're doing cash or debt funding there, but we do have it in our financial plan to be able to support either action there. Just kind of one more, drill down here. So when I said operational improvements on our water supply roadmap, this whole slide here is just what we mean on our roadmap. So operational improvements, that covers everything from stream release optimization to really working well with Sonoma County Water Agency, SCWA, to optimize how we're taking water from them and how we're putting that through our system. It also includes conservation. So we've increased our investments in conservation, and they all go hand in hand operationally with how we are trying to improve our water supply situation. Capital investments, when I said early action items, those are kind of the more specific low-hanging fruit, kind of easy, not easy projects, but the projects we could easily identify early on in the process. And that was connecting permanently Phoenix to Bon Tempe, so we could take advantage of that on a more regular basis. And then providing permanent electrical pumps out at Sulahule. So again, that we can, within our own footprint, take advantage of those resources more regularly and have them there available at all times. And then when we talk longer term investments, that's really the stuff that Paul and his team are bringing to the board and the public, a couple of times a month. That's talking about conveyance, bringing water from Sonoma, bringing more water from Sonoma into our system, storage, which would be enhancing or expanding our reservoirs, or other supply enhancements, which would be kind of the alternative ideas, recycled water, desalination, those type of things. So big ticket, big dollar stuff. And that's what Paul and his team are working through. Okay, how it works in our CIP in general, kind of the mechanics here, and this is really a lot of background, and I'll kind of unpack a lot of these slides in the next few. But our baseline CIP for the day-to-day and kind of like predictable funding, that's about $20 million a year in our financial plan. In our CMF, which is the fixed fee, our capital maintenance fee provides most of that, $17 million. We do, transfer money over from our rate base to help supplement this. And so that's a little bit of a new feature here, using our variable rates to help our capital program. And I think it's a good thing, and as I'll show you in terms of some of the financial planning flexibility that gives us. The deferred maintenance investments, that's those longer term kind of getting behind the curve things I talked about earlier. Those are being phased in. So we didn't just, all of a sudden, fully fund them. We decided we need to ramp up to that each year over the next 3 years. We're phasing into those. So more and more in the budget each year will be dedicated there. And we'll have a longer kind of discussion on prioritizing those, in the out years of the next budget cycle, in the sense of, where should we spend years 3 and years 4 of this financial plan and deferred maintenance projects. And as I mentioned, that may include additional debt issuance for some of the larger scale ones, depending on where we're at by then. But those are all kind of in the same kind of general, within our current footprint, our current system, projects and infrastructure we need to invest in. Water supply roadmap, that currently in our financial plan is funded at $9.7 million annually. And that has kind of a breakout budget that includes small projects like I talked about before, the Sulahule and Phoenix projects, as well as a lot of these initial design and kind of 10% and 30% design efforts that Paul and his team are working on. So that's over the next 3 to 4 years, that's providing kind of the backbone funding to keep us moving on these studies and to keep us moving in terms of having the funds available to investigate and to begin these projects. In addition to that, we have a water supply reserve, and that's $2.5 million annually. And so for the next couple of years, we're building up a balance there. And I think, the board will have the flexibility to either use that and or, convert that same cash stream if needed in the future. So I'm going to put it here on the slide. Our existing debt service is $9.5 million. About a little less than 10% of our operating budget right now, and so it's a manageable number. It's a number we've had in our budget for the last few years. It hasn't changed much, so it's a well-established number in line item in our budget. And then kind of the conclusion of this, which I'll kind of show you how the numbers work within these constraints that I've just listed out here in our current financial plan and the rates over the next couple of years. We are able to take on additional debt proceeds of between $250 million and $300 million within our current rate structure. So without having to make major changes in the rate structure, we could, not that we should, but we could take on between 250 to 300 if needed within our current financial plan. And I'll explain how we get there. So this is kind of a graphical representation of what I had just said, and this might be easier to see how this grows over time. So the gray in the bottom there, that's our capital budget, and you can see the significant increases over the next 4 years, and that really is that deferred maintenance and some of those large projects coming in. So you can see where we're at now, 2 or 3 years of stepped increases, intentional stepped up increases in our capital program. And then after you get out to that 4th year, just more of a kind of I'm assuming there'll be a CPI or 4 to 5%, right? We haven't, agreed on this. We haven't put it in the rate structure yet, but I'm kind of assuming a natural inflationary trend after that point. So 4 to 5 years of stepping up, and then that kind of more inflationary based increase after that. The blue is the water supply roadmap budget. I didn't mention this in the first slide. We have $4.5 million this year. So we stepped up into that too, and then $9 million going forward. So a little bit smaller blue box in this current year, fiscal 24, larger blue boxes going out. And again, that could be continued cash funding. And we also have the option to potentially turn that into debt service. And that's kind of what makes this all hold together over the long term. And then the yellow on the top is just that additional portion that we're currently putting into reserve for water supply projects. But again, it's kind of in that same discussion or same overall strategy of putting away cash funds now for water supply projects later in the future.
Brett, just to be clear, the capital budget that you're showing here is for either deferred maintenance or ongoing capital improvement programs. Does not include funding for new infrastructure associated with the water supply roadmap.
So that is true. The gray bars of capital funding is just what we would normally be doing anyway to take care of our system. It's just pipes, pumps, buildings, vehicles, that kind of thing. So it would always be in the capital budget, regardless if we were doing water supply. It's just capital budget. It is increased because we chose as part of the rate package to make more investments into it to attack some of those deferred maintenance schedules. But the gray is just pure normal capital. All the blue is water supply, blue and the yellow potentially, but gray is just baseline existing capital.
But it includes the increases that are about reducing our backlog of maintenance.
Yeah.
So in some ways,
that's
like
the step up.
Yeah, no, I get it. I just wanted to be clear. In some ways, like it'd be helpful to show that, because that's another investment that we have been very forthright about needing to make.
Yeah.
And that it reflects, a strategy and an importance for the district and the board to start chipping away at that. So maybe that might be something to show out a little differently in the next graph.
I agree. I'll take a look at that for sure. And then just as a reminder too, the dotted line there at the bottom is our current debt service, flat debt service schedules over the next 10 years. I would say that as you get out into the 2040s and 2050s, those start to get paid off and drop down. So there is, a longer tail to this, but for clarity over the next 10 years, it's basically flat. And then we can get into the out years if we need to, as we get closer to there. Okay, so one of the kind of boundaries or kind of limits here would be our own fiscal policies on debt management, right? We're talking about potentially taking on more debt for projects, and so reviewing our debt management policy. I attached it to the staff report for reference, but the high level summary here is shown here on the slide. We have our debt management policy on purpose so that it gives us kind of objectives, parameters, and really keeps us in line so that we can maintain a strong debt position and good credit quality over the long term. So the key pieces that are debt capacity in the sense that how much is our total outstanding debt? And within our current policies, we limit that debt to 4 times our operating budget, right? Our operating budget right now is a little bit over $100 million. I'll show how that works out here. But our total limit is expected it should be no more than 4 times our annual operating budget. The next kind of limit that we do have facing going forward is our debt service coverage ratio. And that's a long way of saying how much you're spending on your current debt each year to pay it down, your debt service payments. Do you have enough kind of surplus cash in all of your other operations to make sure you can pay down your debt each year? So it's similar to how a credit agency would look at a person. They would look at your income, look at all your other expenses you have to pay. And then after that, do you have enough money to pay your debt, right? And so it's kind of your surplus operating cash. How much more, do you have than you need to pay your debt down by? We have it in our policy that we want to maintain at least a ratio of 150%, meaning we want to have surplus at the end of the year and then at least, 1.5 times what we need to pay our debt down. The existing debt that we do have, we have three debt issuances right now. They each require us to have at least 125. And so they're a little bit nicer on us than we are on ourselves. You know, they give us this 125% kind of floor requirement. We try to hold ourselves to a little bit higher standard, meaning 150. We want to make sure we have more than we're required to, more than the bare minimum. And so that's kind of the general range there. Is our policy is 150 at the minimum, and our debt covenants don't let us go anything below 125.
Where are we right now? So our minimum debt coverage ratio should be 150%. Where are we now?
With the last budget, we're closer to 300. So we're closer to 3 to 1. We had been hovering kind of right around that 200, 175 range. But with this last budget, we should be closer to 300 currently. Within our policy, there's also a mention of intergenerational concerns. And so I think we've had some discussions on this, and we've had some public comment on this in terms of, we need to always be evaluating cash funding versus, saddling the next generation with 30 years of debt for what we're doing. And so there is that, kind of balance in our minds we need to keep. And there's not like a strong ratio for this. There's no financial guidelines, but I think it's in the policy so that we at least entertain the idea of, continuing to pay cash with today's dollars and today's, residents versus saddling future generations with debt from prior residents or prior times. So we do want to make sure we're keeping that in mind. And then credit quality, it's just kind of another statement. You can find this all over our fiscal policies, but it basically says we're going to do whatever we can to make sure our credit is high quality. We're not going to sacrifice the credit or our quality of our credit and get down into lower credit ratings and higher interest rates, if at all possible. So we're going to take any necessary steps, and that's not only important to us just for financial management, but it's important that the credit rating agencies see that and they know that we're committed to that, and that becomes part of their, evaluation of, do we hold ourselves to that, and do we actually do that? And that basically means, do we raise rates or cut costs when we have to? So that's what that's saying to us, right? Is, are you managing actively, and are you, taking the steps you need to maintain a high credit quality? So it's in our policies there. I think we've done a good job acting on that, and it's just another thing that we have to keep in mind for this long-term planning lens here.
Brett, thank you so much. And I really appreciate bringing up the intergenerational concerns. I think that that's a really important facet here. And it's complicated because we make investments that do span generations. And we have backlog of maintenance that's from previous generations, but will benefit future generations. Is there any sort of industry standard or guidance or any thought? I mean, especially as we begin to identify potentially big, expensive projects where we might change our ratio significantly. Just wondering if there's any thought guidance around that.
I've never seen anything, definitive. And I think even the way I can see this written in this policy is it was intentionally kind of meant to just be, make sure you talk about it, right? And so I don't have great guidance for this. I can look into it more to see if I find guidance elsewhere, but I don't know. And I think, I think you probably almost touched on this, and I don't want to get too far into it, but I think it goes both ways, right? Doing nothing is also saddling the future with debt. And so, I think there's, that's part of our job is to kind of pick through that, is we don't want to just do nothing. And then our future, things get more expensive in the future. So if we don't do anything, it's going to be more expensive for the next generation to do things than it will be for us. And so, yeah, at the same token, you don't want to just, debt fund everything and just be paying debt service on, on debt service was refinanced 5 times and it's going back to some project in the 70s that we're still paying for type thing. So I think that's the balance that our, whoever put this policy in wanted us to consider as we're going forward.
That's great.
Brett, you're correct. It's more expensive in the future, but if you take inflation versus interest, it costs you now to pay it down. So you have the money now, you don't have to borrow it. So I don't really think that's a valid argument that it's more expensive in the future, because I think if you look at the interest rate versus the inflation rate, they basically follow each other. So I don't think that is really a consideration. And I don't think you're going to find any guidance on this. It's just judgment, and it's logical. And your analogy to a person's credit rating is exactly right. That's how you have to think of it. How much you make, how much you spend, what you got left.
Except construction costs seem to be outpacing inflation. And so our general costs do tend to be different than CPI on some levels, chemicals and others. So it's not a direct correlation with interest in construction, but I think the point high level makes sense.
Chemicals are operating costs, so that's a different issue. But if it's true, there's always the CPI for construction costs. And, you know, I think what's really happening right now, what I see is that people are still struggling with the lost income during COVID, and they're trying to catch up. And you see it particularly in food prices and things like that. That's the issue that I'm observing. So I don't know. I wouldn't pay too much attention to short-term increases. I think you have to look at the longer-term trend.
More Brett on this?
No, I mean, I think the point that I would agree with is that a lot of this is judgment. And I think, you know, we kind of dabble into things that you could probably try to work out an exact number, but I think it really is more of a judgment call, as Director Russell was saying.
Right. Well, you know, I come out of this report thinking we are in remarkably strong financial shape. We only have $10 million in debt. We have capacity to go significantly higher to fund projects that are needed for our community. I agree with you that pushing the upper levels of our possibility would not be healthy for the organization, probably for our customers, and in terms of future fees and expenses and strength of the financial side of the institution. But you know, if I were to take a swag, I'd say we probably do have about 150 million, maybe a little bit more, that could go towards some of this water supply projects without overly burdening us, which means that anything above that with what we're considering would have to come from federal grants, state grants, and other efforts, or otherwise it's going to be extremely difficult for us to do it. So this is a great overview, and it does show that we have a lot of room to expand and to leverage and not over leverage. So I appreciate the overview.
And yeah, and I think you'll see that there's just exactly what you were saying. I think is what's going to be shown in the next few slides, in the sense that, you know, there is capacity in the range you just mentioned. I think that the wisdom of getting to the very limits is probably a little questionable, and that's where state grants and kind of regional partnerships will really kind of fill in the gap there. But to kind of round out the kind of the math and the the policy constraints here, so our existing debt, 145 million right now. Right now, we have 3 major issuances that are really a combination of kind of prior refinances as well as some new money coming out of there. But we have 3 major issuances from 2016, 17, and 2022. As with all debt service, or most debt service, I should say, the principal is expected to go down slightly each year as we make our payments. Right, we're paying some interest, some principal each year. So you can see, the blue bars, slightly going down over the next 10 years. And then our operating budget, again, with our, overall kind of assumed general inflation, and plus some of those targeted investments, that will go up over time, right? Our operating budget will increase absent any changes. And so over time, our capacity to take debt in just dollar amounts will increase. So right now we may be closer to 275 or, maybe almost 300, but in 4 to 5 years, which is kind of what we're talking about, we should have the capacity mathematically of, 350 to 400 million within that policy. Again, market constraints, debt constraints, I don't know exactly how those will shake out, but within this policy, that's about the range that we could take on if we really wanted to push the limits. But I think to Director Smith's point, that gives us kind of a nice high end, and then we can really kind of target in the middle where we want to be and where we can get other sources to fill in. So here's a kind of a quick ratio slide. And again, there won't be a test on the end of this, but it's good reference going forward. Current borrowing costs to the district are around 4.5%. I mean, these change, and interest rates, we can all talk about what the future of interest rates will be, but generally speaking, around now they're about 4.5%. Longer term, that's closer to 3.5%. I mean, we've seen lower than that too, but I would say 3.5% for planning purposes works pretty well for borrowing costs. So at those 2 levels, for every 100 million we take out in financing, we're looking at either around 5.5 million at favorable interest rates, or around 6 million at the current interest rates. So 5.5 to 6 million for every $100 million that we take out in debt. On that same kind of long-term planning, rough numbers type of a line of thinking, our rate revenue base, meaning all the the rate structure we have, will be right around $180 million in 4 years when we come up to thinking about rates next time. So, again, back of the napkin, high level, if we want to increase the overall, expenditure plan, for every $10 million we increase that at that point, that'll be about another 5.5% of a rate impact. And disclosures again fly around in my mind. It's not every person. It depends, how the rate structure goes, and we'll have to really kind of work with the consultants to shake out how that works in each tier. But bottom line to the district, when we get to the next rate setting cycle, for every 10 million we want to increase expenditure plans, it'll be around a 5.5% rate impact.
Brett, sorry, Ben. Ben, as a reminder, our current budget includes about $9 million in debt servicing that kicks in the 24-25 fiscal year. Is that right?
So our current budget on our existing debt, so if we never do anything else, is $9.5 million in debt service. As part of the financial plan, and I grouped it in with those deferred maintenance projects, but as part of the financial plan, we said we think in 3 to 4 years we may have to take out debt service of around 75 million to attack 2 big projects. And so the financial plan has this $5.4 million of a line there that would be the equivalent of that debt service for 2 projects, so a small debt offering. But we haven't committed to that. We could also use that to continue cash funding or kind of to reprioritize. But the financial plan says, in 3 years, we want to attack 2 big projects. That'll be around 5 million in debt service, for those 2 projects.
So 5 million in debt service annually on top of the 9.5 or so million that we're currently paying.
Exactly.
Got it.
Brett, these 2, so for the 100 million, we see what debt service would be and then how much. So if we add these 2 concepts up, per 100 million, a rate increase to support the debt service for 100 million to bring in the 5.5, 6 million would be somewhere around 3.5% rate increase is what I see.
No, that's the correct way of reading that. Yeah, I think you would say that, if you're going to pay debt service on $100 million, that would be a $5 million new expense. And so it'd be kind of half the impact of that rate increase, around 3%. So 3% for 100 million, I guess is kind of what you're getting at, right? 3% rate impact for 100 million.
Just as a rule of thumb, we're going to be talking about these big projects going forward. What we wanted to do on this slide is give the board a rule of thumb to be thinking about. So for every 100 million, approximately 3% rate increase. For 100 million beyond what's currently in the budget, and Brett's going to get to that piece as well.
Can you please speak into the mic?
That's correct, Ben, but don't forget about operating inflation.
Yeah, this won't be I think
on top of that.
Yeah, to Director Russell's point, I think this isn't the only thing moving in the budget, right? So there'll be other things that also have increases to them. This is, we have a lot of moving pieces here. I'm just trying to focus the discussion on capital for today, but that is a good point, Larry.
Well said.
Okay. I've covered a lot of this kind of in my general discussion, so I won't read every word, but we've talked about debt service coverage ratio. That's kind of that surplus used for debt payments. It's a relatively common indicator of financial health. Our current ratio, I think I said earlier, is around 300%. The reason why we're high right now is because we're bringing in additional rate revenues to not only fill up our reserves, to replenish our reserves, but also to invest in capital. And those are non-operating. And so those become kind of a surplus, for this debt service calculation. And then we turn around and take that surplus and put it into reserves and put it into more capital. So it's a healthy way to kind of financially, structure the district where you're bringing in more rate revenue than you need, and you're putting it to places that are one-time or, solid investments within the district. So that gives us a lot of flexibility and really helps our ratios there. Our current rate structure, to kind of summarize, is scheduled to support around $12.2 million in overall, roadmap funding, including the reserves. So roadmap projects, and reserve contributions, $12 million a year. And we can just keep doing cash forever if we want to. We can keep cash funding, keep plugging away. There's no timeline on this. Or, if the board has, identified preferred projects by a certain time in there, we can also use that same, space in the budget, the line items there, that can be converted to a debt service payment is kind of what this is getting at, right? So we can cash fund as long as we want to, or we can take all or a portion of that and turn it into debt service proceeds. And, the way that all works out, kind of looking back at the ratios from the prior slide, if we wanted to convert the entire amount there into debt service, that would give us about $200 million in proceeds. And so that's kind of what Director Smith was referring to earlier in the presentation. In addition to that, We also have debt service, a placeholder in our budget to support about a $75 million investment in large scale projects. And that works out to be about 2 projects. We could maybe get a third in there somehow, depending on final cost estimates, but that's about 2 of the bigger projects. And those were Smith Saddle Tanks, North Marin Line, the treatment plant clarifiers, and Ross Reservoir were the 4 projects that we were kind of going through on that mine. And then I think Director Smith has made this point, and I have it here as well. But this isn't the only source of revenue for us. We need to continue to pursue federal and state grants, not only for the big projects here, but also just in our kind of day-to-day capital, because we do have a lot of capital needs, and we have a relatively small rate base, and so we can't do all of this on our own. And so over time, we need to continue looking for partners, whether that's federal, whether that's state, whether that's regional, because some of these numbers are just too big over time to necessarily fund all by ourselves. So kind of wrapping all of what I've said into hopefully what's a relatively understandable graph here or chart here. This is a scenario, a kind of a, again, project agnostic scenario. This is just dollars that would go into, investments of this nature. What we currently, this is the representation of our debt service, what our debt service would look like over time. If the district decided to do a $200 million debt issuance sometime around 2028, and if we also did a $75 million debt issuance, or they could be combined at some point, timing is kind of, doesn't matter here. But if we did a $75 million debt issuance for deferred maintenance projects, so essentially adding $275 million overall to our overall debt, our debt service would increase from what is today at $9.5 million to what would be in 4 years or something thereabout to about 26 or almost 27 million. And so that would be, a significant increase in our debt and a significant increase in our fixed costs, but it would be a planned expense. And I think we're all kind of looking at this eyes wide open, and it would be something we need to work into the longer term planning and kind of work around that. So it'd be a major change, but it would also be kind of the culmination of years of work. And I think it would be, something that we would necessarily, have to change some of our other financial operations around. But I do want to show that it's possible. And that's kind of the point of today's presentation. It's possible. It's within our policy limits. This general level, 200 million plus 75 is, mathematically possible, and it's, policy-wise possible. I think we had a comment at the beginning today, whether or not the markets would support it, whether or not, credit agencies would look farther once we get to this high leverage amount. I think, even Director Smith said it starts to get, pretty tight there towards the end. So we'd want to, look at this a few times before we pull the trigger on it. But I just wanted to, again, from 4 years, 4 years before we start making these decisions, just give the board and the public a little bit of framework and bounds for kind of how this may work out, over the longer term. I guess one more note before I go. Sorry, Ranjib, I meant to say that the last part there, when we get to that point, our debt service coverage, again, if all the budgets work out perfectly and everything is exactly as we planned it out, would be around 200%. So we'd still be debt service coverage wise in a feasible area, a feasible range. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Have we looked at state revolving funds as potentially cheaper sources of debt financing? Is that an option for us?
So we looked at, this last summer, we looked at WIFIA, which is an EPA, federal agency as a potential funding source, and state revolving funds are similar. It was the advice that was given to us in general is that we are pretty high credit rating now. We're a high, strong financial position. So we don't really need those kind of backstop resources right now. They don't benefit us that much. Those are much more for, agencies in distress or agencies that really don't have the credit rating or may not have the rate revenue, maybe smaller agencies that are, really small districts here and there. So while we could use them, I think the market itself will probably be our cheapest source of cash for things like this. Okay.
I agree with you completely, Brett. It's a great summary. Thank you.
Yeah. And then, so this was just me, not able to not put these on a slide for a day. So I tried to not put them out here until this point in the presentation, but obviously, the crystal ball is much, hazier, anything, 3, 4, 5 years out from now. So a lot of things can change in this calculus. And so I wanted just to kind of check off my disclosures here. Construction costs, those are obviously increasing at a pace probably higher than our rates will and higher than interest rates will, to Director Smith's point. Interest rates, who knows, up, down, left or right. We assume down, but, we don't really know. Other inflationary pressures, as we found in the last rate cycle, those can be, all over our budget. And so we don't know kind of the degree to which those will be pressuring us. Sonoma Water also is a big line item for us, and they just increased their water rates more than we expected. And so I think, we'll have to keep on watching that. And that also ties into water supply math, right? If one of our projects has to pull water in from Sonoma as its main source. So that obviously changes some of the calculus over the long term. Climate change, rainfall, heat, weather patterns, all that kind of stuff obviously impacts the water utility here. Unforeseen infrastructure, I think we'd like to think that we can just put everything on a schedule and fund it and then get replaced and it's all fine and dandy. But I think we also had a presentation from operations recently about, main breaks and, some things just happen, right? There's things happen that we'll need to, not only maintain reserves for, but potentially, maintain some level within our debt, capacity for that. And so we always need to make sure we're, aware that we have a lot of infrastructure in the ground and that could change at any, or the needs could change at any time. And then revenues, I talk about that all the time and you guys, it's beating a drum here, but consumption and demand are obviously huge factors in this, both on my side from the finances as well as on the water supply planning side. And then I think connection fees is a wild card there. That meaning that, we're going to be studying those this summer. That may be an increased revenue source for us with the new housing and the RENA requirements going forward in Marin. I mean, I know we shouldn't, count on that budget wise, and we have not put that in our budget because, Marin and development is not necessarily a smooth, path every time, but that could be a wild card in 3, 4, 5, 10 years in terms of either additional needs and or additional revenues that kind of play into this whole picture. So disclosure is complete. Recap and next steps. Again, our budget and our rate structure support these planned infrastructure and water supply investments. We're currently cash funding all of our roadmap expenses and most all of our capital projects. We'll have the option to continue this cash funding for as long as the board wants, or to convert it to debt issuance for larger projects. Back of the napkin, kind of not a little bit more than back of the napkin, but mathematically speaking, we can probably afford to be in that 250 to 300 range if we need to within our current rate structure and our current policies. And then we'll kind of take a deeper dive specifically on the expense side and on the kind of prioritization side with the budget process, the next 2-year budget that'll begin with the board and staff next spring. And then again, that will include continued discussion about grant opportunities as well. That's the end of my report. I'm happy to take any questions or Ben, if you want to.
Just to add a small piece, what we don't have on this presentation, but we will be talking to the board about staff recommendations will likely be coming to spin off the small Nicasio raise of the spillway, as well as our in-system improvements, the internal pinch points. And once we have a better feel for the costs and timing of those projects, we'll fit it into the overall financial review and how we're going to fund them. Maybe it's just rejiggering priorities in the base CIP or some other approach. And we'll be talking to the board about that as well. And that's more of a kind of a near-term discussion.
Great. Any other board comments?
Just thank you, Brett. It's really helpful to get this. I think I don't think it's it's reality check, or maybe more. I think more legitimately a sense of the envelope that we have to work with respect to both capital improvements and new water supply development. It's not going to be easy, but it doesn't look like it. We clearly have opportunities, and that's encouraging. So thank you.
I'll just echo that. I mean, it's really important that we're showing how we can financially achieve the ambitious goals that we set out with our water supply resiliency, that we're planning for it, and that we're fiscally on target to be able to take advantage of those projects that we are in development on. So thank you.
Larry, any last comments? Nope.
No, cool.
Great. And any public comment on the water supply financial planning update?
Yes, we do. Mr. Ed Jamison.
Yes, thanks. This was another really outstanding presentation by Mr. Uppendahl. I was pleased to see the policies for debt management include a concern about intergenerational benefits, which argues for limiting the use of debt to pay for projects other than the really major ones. Thank you.
There are no further speakers.
Great. Well, that was an information only item. Thank you for the update, Brett, and that helps give us guidance going forward. We'll move on to item 4E, and I think Molly, you're going to help drive this for us, and that's looking at our board reimbursement travel expenses. And then we'll go to 4F, which will be our revised board compensation policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Molly McLean, General Counsel for the district, and I'm here with our district staff attorney, Jared Mills. And I'll just give an introduction, and then actually Jared Mills will be presenting the board travel reimbursement policy revisions. So if the committee board recalls that we came here in January to present some information and review of our board compensation and board travel reimbursement policies. They were last adopted in 2006. So we were looking at, really focusing on what are the legal requirements? What are other comparable agencies doing with respect to these issues? Where do we need to update and correct inaccuracies or things that are outdated? And how can we make them more clear for our directors to understand and follow as we, look at how the district is doing its business. So with that, we're going to start. When we came in January, we presented some of that information. We got input from you, so thank you. We took that back and we worked on some revisions that we want to present today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Mills.
All right. Good morning, directors. To start us off, basic overview of where we're going today. So first, we're going to talk about the legal requirements because oftentimes the question is, why are we here? So that's important today. And then we'll do a basic overview of the current policy, look at some comparable agencies, how they do things, and then do a review of the proposed changes. So the reason why we're here today, the California Government Code actually requires the board in a public meeting to adopt a policy to provide reimbursement for travel-related expenditures. And to save our time, I won't read that out loud, but it is on the slide deck if you're interested. So basically in 2006, as Molly noted, the board did adopt a policy in compliance with the government code section on the prior slide. And the purpose was essentially to establish a consistent policy for authorizing reimbursement for attendance travel for district-related business for district directors. So the current board policy 41 authorizes expenditures or reimbursements for expenditures for directors for, events where the district derives a specific benefit through attendance. And on the slide up here, I kind of listed out the basic items that are reimbursable under the current policy, and that's coach economy airfare, mileage reimbursement, taxi, ground transportation costs. We do have a per diem kind of meal allowance that breaks it out, breakfast, lunch, and dinner with limitations on those. And then it's further limited by arrival and departure times. And then lodging here, there are some restrictions on that. It says a reasonable rate, and then the restrictions being if it's in the Bay Area, there's a limitation on that. And then generally it's 70 plus miles away from the district that we would reimburse an elected official for that. The telephone charges, obviously, this is quite outdated. The dates of long distance calls, and it was quite specific regarding, 10 minutes per day, I believe, to contact your family while you're out of town and things of that nature. So as you can see, room for cleanup. And then the current policy also prohibits these items. So things like upgraded airfare. So if you did first class, for example, alcoholic beverages, and then a whole slew of items that it deems to be of a personal nature. So movies, dry cleaning, spas, things like that. So the current procedure, after an elected official attends one of these events, within 10 days, they're required to submit an expense statement and then include receipts for all items over $10. The finance division processes these and then reviews the current policy for compliance. And then ultimately the general manager reviews and approves. So now switching gears from the current policy to what other agencies were doing whenever we evaluated this. So most of them, as you'll see up here, they have the use of reasonable, or they'll cite to the IRS publication 463, which is updated kind of on an annual basis, that says this is the appropriate amount for lodging, meal food reimbursement, things like that. Some require prior board approval with some sort of limitation. Others don't require that if it's within a certain limit. So basically, I guess what I'm trying to get across, it's kind of all over the board, and it's really up to the board to determine, you know, if they think that these limitations are necessary. So now I'll jump into kind of the proposed revisions that staff came up with, and then also the input from the January meeting. And the first one here, you know, we're going to continue obviously to authorize for travel expenditures related to district business. That's not changing. One thing that we are proposing adding, though, is saying that there's no prior approval for travel within North America. And this is kind of unique to our agency, probably others as well that are water districts. So the American Waterworks Association has an annual conference that sometimes is held in Toronto. So this would allow, you know, directors to attend without needing prior board approval of that. So that is in the draft policy that's attached to the item today. The other items, so just further clarifications to the airfare reimbursement. So obviously we would still be maintaining, and this proposed policy, economy or coach. One thing, there was kind of language in there that was very unclear. Two attorneys at the table, we both read it and scratched our head. What does this mean? And what we think the intent was is if a director purposefully chooses a layover, say you're visiting family while you're en route to attend a conference, that the district's only paying for the direct airfare flight instead of for that layover. So for example, say you're leaving San Francisco, conference is in Chicago, you visit family in Miami, you know, the district's not paying for that across country flight. We would only pay for the direct airfare cost. And then the next thing is if the director determined to do this layover or upgrade, we propose in the policy, what you would do is when you're booking that airfare, you would simply get the ticket cost for the economy direct route at that time. And that's what you would submit for reimbursement. So it's easier for staff to determine what the rate is, because that can be difficult after you've already attended the conference and potentially airfares have changed. The next item on here, we just acknowledge taxis are kind of antiquated. I haven't used one in years. So we just added in Uber, Lyft, rideshare type of options as well. And then we also added in airport parking. So if you're attending a conference and you need to drive into Oakland, San Francisco, the district would reimburse you for the long-term parking rate. The other proposed change in the policy is the meal allowance. Right now we have like a fixed rate that's actually noted down here at the bottom. I don't know if I can do the cursor down there, but it's $12 for breakfast, $15 for lunch, and then $25 for dinner down there at the bottom. And essentially what we're proposing here in the chart is switching over to the General Services Administration, so the federal government, the way that they do per diem for federal employees. And this is actually by locality. So it's pretty specific to the location where you're attending the event. And it actually sets out a rate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner that's updated on a regular basis to align with inflation. So that way we're not having to come back if we have a period of large inflation, requiring updates to the policy on, you know, an annual or really regular basis. The other thing that we added in is a lot of conferences are now requiring you to purchase meals. It's part of the conference registration or attendance. And usually it includes breakfast or lunch is what I've noticed. And if that's the case, we would just ask, and the policy states that you don't try to double dip essentially. So if the conference is providing breakfast included in the attendance cost, you don't put down the per diem for breakfast. The other thing that we did is we removed kind of the rigid departure time. So current policy says if your departure time's after 8 a.m., you don't get breakfast. Well, just acknowledging if you have to drive all the way to San Francisco, you might be at the airport at 6 a.m. for a 9 a.m. flight, for example. So just reasonableness, we think should govern on that. And then there is a small note there. I already talked about the per diem under the General Services Administration. For Toronto or North American travel, that's actually governed by the Department of State, because the General Services is only the United States. So we would rely on the Department of State reimbursement amounts. And that's not in the current policy, but we will clarify that before we bring the final policy back for approval. And then the other items, the lodging, we added in that directors should use the group rates. If the group rate for some reason isn't available at the conference or event, then you would just pick a reasonable alternative. I've touched on eliminating the long distance provision in there because most cell phone plans now include free long distance calling. And then we added in language that's consistent with the board handbook, which would just require if you attend a conference or event and you receive reimbursement for it, that you would report out during a regular board meeting during the general managers and directors update. And then the expenditure and reimbursement approval process on this, basically we're making a caveat on the reimbursements and providing receipts. So provide receipts consistent with the current policy for $10 or more, unless you're only claiming the per diem rate, because we don't believe it's necessary. And then the finance division would continue to review this for compliance with the policy. And then if in the event a reimbursement request was to exceed any of the limits in the policy, that would have to come back to the board during a regular board meeting for approval. So I was asked if I could think of an example of this, and I was like, I actually can. So before working at the district, I represented a public school district, and we actually had an elected official get stuck in Monterey because there was a landslide. So they had to book a last-minute hotel room, and they were going to have to pay out of pocket under their policy. So that went back to their Board of Education for approval in that situation. So with that, happy to answer any questions. Our recommendation, though, is that the committee review and refer this, if there are no changes being proposed, to a regularly scheduled board meeting for approval.
Great comments, Ranjiv.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Very clear. Just one question on airline flights. You know, there, even on economy fares, there can be a lot of variation based on the airline, time of day. Would you consider adding any guidance on how decisions are made regarding which economy fare is permissible, which ones are not?
Yeah, I think that's actually a great question. I was thinking about this. I recently flew, and there's like economy plus, plus. You know, I think that the general guidance would just be basic economy and then within reason, because obviously other things are going to govern the time that you need to leave by. There may not be seats available. So I think as long as it's an economy flight and it's kind of direct route, I think within the policy that's reasonable.
And I would just add that the policy has language in there that recognizes and acknowledges that each of the directors is a public official, and that, you know, there is a standard for having a transparent and, you know, good judgment in how we operate the district, and that is taken into account. So without providing too much detail and constraint, because as Jared said, there's sometimes a need for doing things a certain way. We do acknowledge that the directors are, you know, invested with that accountability to the district and their constituents.
Good judgment.
Yeah, and I would also just add to that point, if you look at the fiscal impact section of the report, this is on a fiscal basis a very small expenditure for the district. So, you know, it's, I think on an annual basis, when I look back for the past fiscal years, it was 1 year less than $2,000 for the entire board and reimbursements. And then the highest year during the last 5 fiscal years was less than $7,000 for all the reimbursements for the entire board for an entire fiscal year. So
Monty?
I think these all look like good, reasonable updates to our policy. So thank you for all. It's like it's not glorious work, but it's good housekeeping, and so I appreciate it.
Larry, any comments?
Yeah, I have two. Where are we supposed to get those rates for the meals from? How do we know how to fill out the expense account? It's an interesting approach. I think it's okay. It seems a little complicated to me. The second thing is, as I recall, the IRS requires receipts over $25. I think that would be a more reasonable number than the $10.
yeah, so on the per diem mill allowance, I'll address that one. So those rates change. Like I said, they're updated on an annual basis, and there's actually a website that you go to. You type in the location that you're going to, it spits the rates out. And I think that primarily that would be on staff and the finance division whenever you get back to just say where you went, and then they would look up those rates. So the directors wouldn't have the responsibility of doing that unless you just wanted to know in advance, you know, what that rate would be. However, they don't vary much. It's only a few dollars.
How do we fill in the expense report? We leave
So-
that part blank?
I think similar to what you do now, and maybe you can just make a notation and we can look at the form and see if it needs updates.
Okay.
The policies
Okay.
to accommodate those.
Well, I think, yeah, that's a good approach. I think also if you put the URL on the form, I mean, I don't mind looking it up, but you know, I don't want to have to find it out, where to find it out.
Absolutely.
And I would say with respect to the other point you raised, Director Russell, that, you know, the reimbursement receipt amount is within the board discretion. I think that $25 isn't unreasonable because the $10 is obviously from some time ago. So that's something that we could accommodate if there's an interest.
Yeah, back to telephone time.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, increasing it to 25.
Sounds good. I'm good with all the thoughtful process. And once again, another example of updating board matters and agency matters, and for the first time in many instances here in 18 years. So thank you for taking a crack at it. Any public comment, Terry?
There are none.
Great. So let's see, I guess I have a motion to refer this as an item for the board to adopt.
Yeah, so moved for board referral.
Yes.
I'll do a second. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Any further direction you guys need, or we're all good?
We have one more policy to cover the next item.
Yep.
And we're
Great.
ready when
So
you are.
4F, revised board compensation policy. Thank you.
Go to like presentation or something. Okay. Okay. Thank you for bearing with us, and we'll talk about board compensation policy. Use the arrows. So similar purpose and goals here. We'll go over the legal requirements quickly and do an overview of the current board compensation policy, look at comparable agencies and how they approach this issue, and then review highlights of the proposed changes. I am going to make a special note here that we're not considering compensation amount at this session. That's something that the staff felt like we would look at as a separate item because there's a lot already to unpack. And so we'll be planning to bring that back at a future date. So legal requirements, California Water Code section deals with the fact that water districts get a per diem amount as opposed to a monthly stipend, and that they do not increase more than 5% per year cumulatively, and they can exceed 10 days per month for payment. We're not going to cover that specifically. We're going to talk more about Government Code Section 53232.1, which talks about what is compensation appropriate for. And it does include these three items. And the last one, or I'm sorry, the meetings of the legislative body, advisory bodies, conferences or training, and then other occurrences if adopted by board policy. So that's where we're here today to talk about board policy. So our current compensation policy for the board was adopted in 2006. Purpose is to establish consistent policy for compensating directors for district business. We also have a district code section, section 2.10.060, that discusses the amount of compensation not to exceed 10 days and gives general guidance on $200 a day for services rendered. And that was put in place in 2016. The policy is a bit outdated, and we'll look at that quickly as we've reviewed that in January. We'll just take another look at that. And then also has a provision that says, or district business as authorized by general manager. So we'll take a look at how we're proposing to revise. So current board policy has some, red outdated committees. We have some new ones that are not identified. Similarly with our advisory bodies where we have appointments, they're kind of not in alignment currently because it's been a while since we've revisited this, and those things do change and evolve over time. So that's one area that we'll touch on later as we look at the revisions. Comparable agencies and what do they do? All of them do have compliance with 53232.1 of the government code, which sets forth, what's automatically allowed. The board committees, the ad hoc committee meetings, the board meetings, and other advisory bodies, as well as training and educational items. And then other, as provided by policy, most other agencies do have a policy, and these really do vary. There is varying degrees of specificity. I did accept East Bay Mud because they have special legislation that lets them have a per diem amount, or I'm sorry, a stipend, monthly stipend amount as opposed to per diem, so they don't have to specify what's covered. But you have anywhere from a very long list of details and categories to whatever seems reasonable. So proposed revisions. In order to bring our policy up to date and also to not weigh it down in necessary updates on a regular basis, we deleted the specific references to committees and advisory bodies and instead include a provision that references state law that covers those items. So meetings of the legislative body, a meeting of an advisory body, conferences or organized educational activities, all covered by the government code as may be amended from time to time. So we incorporated that now into our compensation policy. We do also reference our code, our district code, and we seek to explain that these are to work in tandem and harmonize, that the district code does take precedent because it's an ordinance adopted as code and an ordinance, not a policy. I will note that any changes to the compensation amount in the district code would need to be done via an ordinance at a public hearing, and that's state law. And so the other categories that we're really focused on today, we looked at categories of service. What really is the district business and what does that entail? What are the directors called upon to do in their role as directors? Official attendance at meetings of other public agencies and nonprofits related to the water industry or other work of the district that could impact the district, that provide relevant information to the ongoing work of the district. Attendance at trainings or executive staff briefings. So for example, sometimes there'll be one-on-one meetings with the general manager or the general counsel or other staff for specific work that's going on at the district. And that's definitely service to the district. Attendance at community, ceremonial, or public outreach events held by or supported by district staff. So I know a lot of you may go to workshops. They may not be noticed as board meetings, but there's an interest that you have. And when you're there, you're really interested in focusing on how is a community speaking to the issues that are really within the purview of the district. And then attendance at meetings, conferences, seminars, educational events, webinars on topics related to water industry, water policy, or other issues that could impact the district. This is all important work that the directors do as part of their service. And we have a catch-all, other district business with prior authorization by the board of directors, because nobody can think of everything perfectly ahead of time. And we wanted to make an allowance for things that we may not have anticipated. We did incorporate special rules for travel time. This is something we saw in other policies and thought appropriate. And basically restricts compensation for travel time unless it's outside normal hours of the same day, or not more than one day before and not more than one day after the actual event that you're attending for purposes of compensation. The process is very much the same that we have now. The directors will notify the secretary on a monthly basis. The board secretary does compile a report and then verify it with the directors, and the general manager will review and approve the report for compensation. And with that, we do ask that the committee review and refer this item to a regular board meeting to consider adoption. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Great. Larry Russell, any questions?
Yes, I have one, Molly. How would board approval be achieved? What is the format for doing that, or where would it be done?
It would have to be done at a regular board meeting, and it would have to be agendized as an item.
Pretty tedious.
Yes, I don't think the policy anticipates that that would be necessary very often, if at all, but we wanted to make an allowance
Okay,
for exceptions. And so that's the process that we identified.
okay.
Larry, I had looked at what was drafted, and I couldn't come up in my time here with what wouldn't be captured in those categories. So I feel I agree with Molly. It'd be a very rare occurrence.
That makes sense to me. I thought the list was a good list. I just was curious what that line meant.
Understood.
Ranjiv?
One more question.
Yep, go ahead, Larry.
I mean, Mexico's in North America. Are you talking only Canada, or does it include Mexico?
North
When
America.
you use the term
includes
North America.
Mexico. North America is North America as defined
Okay,
on the
I
map.
thought so. I just wanted. Yeah,
I-
that's cool. That's cool. I thought that's what you meant, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I don't know how many water conferences are currently held in Mexico, probably more likely Canada, but we didn't want to be overly specific.
Agreed.
How about Panama?
I think that's actually Central America.
Really, I think that might be North America. All right, go ahead.
This all sounds
Testing my geography, and I'm an attorney, so.
okay. It's okay. I think we're all good. This sounds great to me. All these things sound good. Thank you.
I'm curious about what exactly we're changing here. I saw some of the notes, but maybe if you could pull up slide 8, because I think that showed the 3 different ways that the state categorizes meetings that we would get reimbursed for. But then your detail shows that it seems like almost anything, a community seminar, a public event. So are there any meetings that we have reimbursed in the past that we wouldn't now? Are we excluding anything? Like let's just say like an HOA association meeting where we're asked to attend. Would that now no longer fall in this policy?
Yeah, my apologies. I'm having technical difficulties getting that list up on the screen there, but we will share it. I think that it specifies that that could be included as long as it impacts the district and is related to district business. And, not just your own HOA that you're attending, mention something about you're on the water board. There is a bit of judgment. But again, we believe that, there's accountability for all our directors and that you take that seriously. So, the goal was not to restrict things so much as really provide appropriate categories. I think the significant change is that a lot of this was not identified in the current policy, and that there was sort of a general catch-all that it said the discretion of the general manager. And quite frankly, we couldn't find something like that in any other policy. We felt it was more appropriate to align the the proposed policy with how other water districts are approaching it, which is categorically. So again, it's not so much that we felt like there was really an issue with the work and the service that was being rendered, so much as really clarifying that, that there is a space for that, for being compensated. And that is still within the discretion of the board. This is the policy section, not the state law section. So, that's where we landed with this.
Director Smith, if I could, like the homeowner association example you brought up, what I've seen is that sort of meeting can be very different. It could be an invitation to come to speak on a topic where there's prep work involved and discussions. I may join the board member, or it may be a 5-minute drop-in. And my point is, I do think I've seen judgment by board members, good judgment, where the former would often show up, and I've really never seen the latters show up on these. So I do think there will continue to be an element of judgment of individual board members, but some meetings that feel light do take a significant amount of time and work.
Yeah, I think for me, and there's a distinction between official business and my own public relations. For example, if I'm thinking about running again or something, and maybe if we include official attendance for each of these items, it helps to clarify that you're really there representing the district, not your own, doing your own public relations activity.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Great. I have no further comments. Any public comments on this item?
There are none.
Okay, so with that change that was recommended, can we have a motion to approve this revised, or to send this revised compensation policy to the board for approval?
So moved.
Second?
Great. And
I want to thank you very much for your time and
Yeah.
attention.
thank you, Molly. Thank you. Great. We'll move on to our last item, which is upcoming meetings.
The next Finance and Administration Committee meeting is on May 23rd. That's it.
Great. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.